Tracy.
All right. Well, I just want to say hello. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us to discuss performing arts facilities and how to reopen during this time. I am just going to give you a few tips on Zoom. If you are not currently living in this platform, we want to make sure everyone is well oriented. But before I do that, I just want to give a shout out to some of our staff that are on this call. Laurel Cannon Alder, our grants manager, is running tech for us today. You may or may not hear from her, but she is present with us. Vicki Pinella Borns, our executive director, is on this call. Jason Bocut, our performing arts manager, is here, and Kat Potter from our Department of Heritage and Arts is on the call, and you will hear from her later. If anyone else is here and I've missed you, I'm sorry. You're welcome to pipe up if you want, or you could message me. And I'm Tracy Hansford. I'm the Community Arts Coordinator. I work closely with all of these people, actually. And we're, again, just so grateful you could join us today. I am going to share my screen with you quickly. There we go. This is just a quick orientation. I'm sorry to keep using this. Jason hates it, but it's extremely difficult to get a good screenshot with the buttons at the bottom. So if you hover your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you can see some buttons. Over in the left-hand side, you have a mute and a video button. You are currently on mute, and I believe we have removed your ability to unmute yourself. If you would like to say something,
check 1 2 1 2.
Maybe not. We would prefer that you raise your, oops, sorry team. We would prefer you raise your hand, which I'll show you how to do. Next to your mute button is a on-off video button. We love to see your smiling face, but if you want to turn that off, that's okay too. In the center here, you have a participants button. If you click participants, you will get this menu on the right side of my screen. And at the bottom, you have raise your hand. If you raise your hand, the Utah Arts and Museum staff will be able to see who wants to say something and in which order, and we can call on you. And then also in the bottom center, you have a chat feature. We would love if you have questions to use that chat feature, or if there's something you'd like to share with the entire group, you're welcome to put it there. Let's see, I hope that helps everyone. And I think that is my portion of today's presentation.
Great, thank you, Tracy. And we're going to turn the time over to Kat Potter. Kat, are you on?
On. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Okay.
Hi.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Jason and Tracy, for coordinating everything today. I'm happy to be here to listen to you all. I think having a facilitated conversation about these topics is really important for all of us. So I appreciate the opportunity to listen. I just want to start with some basics that I'm sure you all know, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. As you know, the state has a color-coded system of where we are and what we're able to proceed with during the coronavirus crisis. And we have gone from red to orange, and now some of our communities are in yellow and some of our communities remain in orange. And we really can't wait until we can get to that green. That green is the light at the end of the tunnel. We don't know how long that will take, but time and data will tell. I want to make sure, and I'm going to try to share my screen as well, that everybody knows how to get to the information that has been provided by the state. So give me just a minute. Can you all see the state's coronavirus website? So again, I'm sure you know this, but coronavirus.utah.gov is the state's website for all things coronavirus. Sometimes it can be a little challenging to navigate and to find everything you need. I wanted to let you know that the Utah Leads Together 2.0 plan, which is linked in the list of options on the right of the screen. If you clicked on the Utah Leads Together plan, you can see the 2.0 plan. If you scroll down a little bit further, you can see guidelines for each phase of the dial can be found in the color-coded guidelines document of the plan as a separate link. And if you click on that, this is the brand new guidelines that just came out. They're dated Thursday, they're dated yesterday. So you can see the most updated version of those guidelines here. As you scroll down, they are sorted by general public, employers, and then by industry. And you can see their tables of high risk, moderate risk, low risk, and new normal, which is the green phase. So depending on where you are, we're either in the orange or the yellow. The other way to find this information is going back to the coronavirus website. There is up top a tab that says color-coded guidance, and there are two different pages. One is for orange and one is for yellow. And these have been updated with the most recent guidelines. So as you scroll down, you can click on the different links. And for those of you here, there is the events, cultural arts, and entertainment link. And this actually takes all of those guidelines in the other document and includes them here. And these are updated as of the 4.3 version of the guidelines document. So I wanted to make sure that everyone had that information. The main differences in the update that I have found, and I'm sure there are other updates within other sections, but specifically for events, there are some, and I think this is updated in, let me pull up the yellow right now. There is a very specific item that says that events need to be able to have attendance gathered. You can see the second bullet point here, must have ability to track attendance. So that is something that they've added based on the newest version of the guidelines. They also have called out no temporary mass gatherings, and those would be festivals and types of events with free-flowing audiences where attendance isn't taken. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm sure you can all find that information. So as you have questions, again, these come from the state, from the Public Health Department and the Coronavirus Task Force. As the Department of Heritage and Arts and the Division of Arts and Culture, just want to let you know, we cannot direct the Department of Public Health to change the color. We cannot direct them to change the guidelines. What we can do is listen, as a lot of other industry associations are doing this as well. Listen to what groups are worried about, concerned about, what things could be changed to make situations easier for us all to get back to work. That's what we'll do today. And we can take that information and share this with those on the task force and those within the Department of Public Health so that they can make decisions that are right for all of us and for the health of our community. So again, thank you for coming together, and thank you to Wendy and Brooke for coming up with this idea to have us all sit at the table and talk to each other about how we can prepare our facilities.
Kat, thank you so much. That was terrific. I know this is with the shifting of phases, there's so many changes that are going to be coming. So if anyone does have questions, like Kat said, please put them in the chat. And if we can't answer them directly, I'm sure there's some pretty good group genius within this call that could share some information. All right, so we're going to start moving into the way we're going to function this. So the way it's going to kind of happen is we have some questions we're going to pose. I sent that to most people. I hope all of you received them. Wendy Hassan, Cache Valley Center for the Arts, and Brooke Horsch from Utah Presents at the University of Utah are kind of going to be facilitating conversations around these questions. So we'll move through that. If you have questions that come up through this, things that you want to know, things you want to dig into a little bit more, put them in the chat and we'll make sure to have time to talk about those because we have a nice amount of time for this call. So we've gathered this group today to share, to create a statewide working group of people who oversee facilities or can make decisions about facilities. The goal is to come together, share questions, knowledge, ideas, approaches for phased reopening. We want this time to be useful, as well as to have a more coordinated approach across different organizations and cities and counties. And I think I've gone over the questions. So I want to now open this up to Wendy and Brooke to start taking some of these questions from the initial list and I think that's good. Go ahead and unmute yourselves and start going through these questions.
Thanks, Jason. I think we're both unmuted. Hi, everybody. It's good to see all your faces. Some of you I've already seen today on another call. I think we're all starting to get a little zoomed out. But I think so we have these questions, and the way we thought we would approach it would be to have Wendy and I take turns in responding to a question with how we're approaching it or thinking about it. And then if you have a thought, if you could raise your hand using that feature, and then we'll engage a couple of you to also respond. If you would rather not talk, but you just want to type what you're doing in the chat, that is super helpful too. Mostly I think we all want to learn from each other. I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now is that there's not a federal coordinated response as to how we're all evolving and returning or not returning to activity. But we also don't have a coordinated state response for all the kinds of venues. And so what Wendy and I found as we were in conversations with colleagues nationally and with some of you locally was that it was like Wendy would say something and I go, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of that. And so that was really our inspiration to come together in this group and use all of our collective smarts and creativity to sort of figure out how we might go forward with our own facilities, and also to raise up some issues that maybe aren't being thought about in one facility but are in another, and really should be addressed holistically across the state, so that we're all approaching welcoming patrons and artists back into our facilities in the safest way possible. So, okay, so the first question that we were going to talk about was, what are the requirements for face masks for both staff and patrons, and is it legal to require this of patrons to wear them? So what I am hearing from our university legal counsel is that it is likely legal, and we are planning, excuse me, to require them of patrons at this point. I think in both the orange and the yellow phase, as we heard from the governor most recently on the session, Governor Mike Leavitt, that we're not past the point of contamination and risk. And so from a Utah Presents perspective and a university perspective, right now we're planning on not only requiring all of our staff to wear them, but also requiring them of patrons. So I'm curious, for others, what are you all thinking? Let's see, Jim Craig says, if you require them, do you have to provide them? My understanding is no, you don't. Obviously, that if someone shows up without a mask and you turn them away, they'll probably not come back to your venue. So it might be useful to say, oh, you don't have one? Let us give you one, But that's my understanding. Does anybody have a different understanding of that issue?
Seth Miller has his hand up.
Great.
I was just going to say, at the Grand, we're planning our first production starting in July. Preview is July 1st. And we are strongly encouraging all patrons to wear them, but we're not planning on requiring the patrons to wear them. All of the staff and crew and everybody will, of course, be required to wear them. But it was kind of our feeling that the people that want to wear them, have them and can, but those that don't want to, as long as we're maintaining the social distance guidelines that are laid out in the restrictions, we feel like we don't need to require people to, but that's just what we're doing.
Right. I think that there is concern about negative pushback, and some retailers are experiencing that. So that certainly is something to think think about.
So Lisa Zumpt has an interesting idea. If you want to require masks, perhaps you could have a nonprofit who could make them, sell them near the ticket office / entrance.
Oh,
And
you're
Paul-
cutting out, Jason. So I'll,
I cut out?
Jason, we're unfortunately losing you, but I
So,
can see
Jason
the
was
chat.
reading-
So what about performers on stage? Yeah, he was reading the
Jason
performers on
was
stage.
reading Lisa Zump's.
I think everybody's probably
we have a
approaching it
question
differently.
I'm going to interject. This is Laurel, and I'm just going to quickly interject. I'll try and match back and forth. Thank you, Brooke, for reading the chat. I think we can remove ourselves out of that. Tessa has a question and or a hand raised. So if I can just interject and then I will, when you have raised your hand and been called on, I'll unmute you so we can move forward a little more seamlessly.
Yeah, I actually just had another comment with the masks. We're an outdoor venue, so it may be a little different for us, but we're thinking we're going to require them when people are out of their seats and let them know when they're seated, since they'll be socially distanced. They're free to remove their masks while they're seated, and we just ask that they wear them while they're up and around.
Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, see? Brilliant. Let's see, is there anybody else with their hand up, Laurel?
Jim Craig has his hand up and you're unmuted.
Thanks. I contacted the governor's office on the website earlier today to ask specifically about performers and whether they needed to stay 6 foot apart on stage and whether they needed to have masks while on stage. And their guidance was that they did not have to have masks on while performing, and they should try to maintain 6 foot distance, but if it's not possible, then they can be closer to that. And I think it's following along the same guidelines as team sports. And this is in yellow, not orange.
Great, that's super helpful. Thank you, Jim. I see that Vicky asked if any of us had thought about a maskless, that's a hard word to say, maskless section in your venue. And the first reaction to that is that we're already having to deal with not knowing how many people are going to buy in a household together. And so for most of us from a ticketing perspective, what we're having to do is say, you can buy your tickets, but you won't know your seats until you arrive, because we have to wait to see how all the households clump together. And then that's how we make the seating map. So to have a maskless section, although it's a good idea in theory, for me, it would be really hard to overlay that part on top of the already challenging, like how we're going to seat people. So that's kind of my thought around that.
Sarah Gibbs has a question next.
Great.
A bunch of printing places are doing this, but Residence Printing, who is a local Little Cottonwood company, is printing masks with your logo on it. And he's done a bunch of them. And another place where I do work with, I've tried them on and they're great. And so you could have your organization's logo put on them. And I put the website in the chat.
Thank you.
And then I don't know who was speaking earlier, but said how asking people to come in with their masks on, and then once they get to their little spot, taking them off. I'm hoping to do that too. We're hoping to have maybe 1 or 2 events in June of like 10 people, because I have the ability to do small events, and gonna see if that that works out as well. Like have them come in with their masks. Once they get to their little zone, they take it off. If they have to go to the bathroom, put the mask back on. So hopefully.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Any other thoughts on masks, or are we ready to move on to the next topic?
I think we're good. Wendy, do you want to take the next one?
I'd be delighted to. So Brooke and I are in kind of different communities. Cache County is one of the counties going to yellow, and we've been very lightly hit so far. We've only had 60 cases in our county. And so attitudes are a little bit different and risk is a little different. It may mean that we have greater risk later than we have so far. So just kind of for what it's worth before we leave the mask section, we will plan to have staff wear them. We will not require audience members to wear them. So we have very different approaches on that as well. So my question is on liability and permitting from the city, county, and state. Now, I don't run an outdoor event, so I haven't run across the permitting pieces yet, but I do know that as we've looked at liability, and we had a group that wanted to come in June, so we had this conversation. What happens if something goes wrong? That's the worst thing, right? What if somebody gets sick and there's an outbreak? Then there could potentially be a lawsuit. And as you look at risk, we decided you can either accept that risk and say, hey, kind of come at your own risk. We could mitigate it, which is what we would do with all these social distancing things. We could transfer it. We could make them all, like everybody has to sign a liability, like a whole harmless agreement before getting their tickets. Or we could just, well, I guess those are kind of our options. In the end, what decided us was not the actual liability, but the public relations issue. So we were concerned that if we say, okay, you can hold the event, that organization might then use us to say, okay, now you have to come to rehearsal. And that could be a problem. And if somebody with a camera catches somebody, so we figured out how we could do it physically, but then we had to ask the question, would this particular audience comply with those requirements? And this particular audience, short of taking out the physical seats, I think would pull up tape, lift up, because if you're watching your own kids perform, I just don't see somebody sitting on the back row of the balcony if there are seats available closer to. So we decided that it wasn't worth the risk, not the liability risk, but the public perception risk. So I'm curious if any of you have had questions with the kind of permitting side of it, with the liability side of it, or with that public relations side of it that could add to the conversation. And while you're thinking, just quickly, this is the group I've been so hungry to talk to. Thank you for being here. I'm just so grateful to hear your perspectives and to see your faces.
Thane Fisher has his hand raised. I've unmuted you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So we have a venue called the Monarch in Ogden. We're a little bit of a unique space from we're a large auto garage, historic auto garage that we converted into a creative space. And we also have event space and restaurant, retail, etc. Our restaurant and retail has opened. We are now looking at possibly doing our June art stroll. And so we're working through the logistics on that, using it as a ticketed event, all the social guidelines, et cetera, making sure that we comply. In reference to the social and the liability standpoint, I think we're more concerned about the social perspective than we are truly the actual liability. We are also going to strongly suggest that if you are an at-risk individual, that you just do not attend. I think that's, you know, probably the safest way to say it, and that'll be on all our tickets. We look at doing a more of an Eventbrite ticket, and then have actual scheduled times that you would attend the social distancing, kind of almost like we have a trek, so to speak, that'll go through. There'll be spaces every 15 feet that take you on a tour throughout the entire space. That will, you know, each space will be located in front of a studio. And then our individual creatives or artists have their own guidelines within their own studio facility that they're comfortable with, that again meet all the guidelines. But from a liability standpoint, you know, liability is liability. It doesn't matter how much you try to negate it. I mean, you can have a form that says, if I fall off this bungee swing, I'm not liable. And yes, you still are liable, you still will be sued. So, you know, that's just where it is. So our concern is more just the physical and social perspective, and you know, we'll decide for sure by Monday, but I think we're willing to move forward from our community. If you have any questions. I'll mute myself.
I think that connects with the question that, or a comment that came up in the chat before we finished about the masks, which was, as far as maskless sections are concerned, can that be something where those patrons do so at their own risk? And I definitely think so. I assume that many of you have seen this resource, but it came out a few weeks ago, and it was an entertainment lawyer, or a lawyer who specializes in all sorts of things related to entertainment, and he addressed that very question of, like, are we going to be opening ourselves up to be sued by patrons if they get sick while they're with us? Same for employees. His advice in that moment was, yes, people will try to sue you, but in his experience and based on his knowledge and his interpretation of the law, that they won't win. And if they did, that would be a huge avalanche for all spaces, not just arts, obviously, but then that could be extended into all forms of business, all retail, anything that people step into the space for any reason. So.
And that's been one of the arguments against laws that would limit liability for employers, is that these suits are very difficult to bring, they're very difficult to win. And so for us, I think the greater danger is the public shaming. If somebody breaks the rules and somebody catches it on social media, and then we were the host to that event, and then, you're just covered with grease and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's a multi-pronged challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready for the next topic, or are there any other? Oh, thank you for the link to the video, Bridget, that Brooke referenced.
Oh,
I will be watching that.
He's pretty funny actually too, so it's it's only like 15 minutes. So.
How can that be funny? Now I'm super intrigued.
Well, he's sort of, I know, not like the stuff he's talking about is funny, but just his delivery is
We have
good.
a hand raised with Jansen Davis.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe just to follow up kind of the comments that's what I'm hearing too, as far as risk goes, is that it's, the idea of risk is all over the place. And so, or liability, liability is all over the place as far as the legal ramifications. I think the thing that we're coming to a conclusion on here is this is all about risk. And there is no way that any one group, one individual, one company, one collective like we've got here can address every individual's risk tolerance. I think what we've got to do in each of our organizations is, as an organization, determine what we feel comfortable about offering. Then we're going to have to deal with the fact that some, it will be fantastic, and others, it will take them time to come back. And we can be nimble and try to address those as best we can. But I think we got to start first individually in each organization to determine what can we bear and what can we offer to our stakeholders, whether it's participants or patrons, as to some level of safety that we think is realistic, and then we've got to deal with things from there.
Jansen, one thing I love about what you said too is that industry specific, like we kind of need to internalize this. And some of the most successful work I've seen happen has been where people have had some humor with it, like it's a branded thing. Or I love what Utah Shakes was talking about, having masks that tie into the specific show, like a Jolly Roger for something in British. And the worst that I've seen is when it gets politicized. So wearing that mask is actually defining your political party and creating polarization. And that's another thing that has not made this easier and has not been awesome. So finding a industry specific, the grocery stores that are saying superheroes wear masks, right? To try to make it cool, I think is better than to browbeat people or to try to have that come from outside, but to make it internal. So awesome thought. Okay. Have we about done liability?
Andrew Wallenstein. We'll go with Andrew and then Thane. Andrew, you are unmuted. Nope, you're not. Now you are.
I probably don't need to say much, but my thoughts echo really a lot of what Jansen was saying. So I work for West Valley City over the Division of Arts and Culture. We have the Utah Cultural Celebration Center, as well as Harmon Theater, where Health Center Theater used to be located. And, we have such a wide range of programs that we do. And so we've actually had to break it down sector by sector within our own division, because at the cultural center we have sales and rentals, very large conventions. We have partners programs like the West Valley Symphony that come in and practice, sometimes hold performances there. We have our art gallery spaces. We have festivals that we do. And so we've had to break it down bit by bit. We aren't so much concerned about the liability. And like Jansen was saying, you know, no matter what we do, there's always going to be risk involved, right? And we're kind of set up to handle those risks in normal day-to-day business. And so it's less about the risk, more about the PR for us as well. You know, if we had, let's say, West Valley Symphony come in for a practice, you know, there was the church group in Seattle or somewhere in California. They got together for a choir practice, and somebody ended up having COVID and really decimated the choir group. That's the last thing we would want to have happen and publicized. And so, you know, from our gallery exhibits, we have our main gallery. We've actually pushed 2 exhibits to a digital format for the first time ever. And my staff has been incredible and really pushed the boundaries of their knowledge and what they're capable of doing. But we're also looking at that as, you know, wonderful opportunities for our future. So now every time we do a gallery exhibit, it's not just going to be a physical exhibit. We are going to have a digital component to it. We're exploring the options of adding podcasts and different things like that to it as well. And so I think this is really allowing us to be poised for the future. But once again, it's broken down of what can and we can't do based on the situations. We've canceled a lot of our larger conferences that were booked, and the smaller meetings or conferences of 20 to 50 people, we're now shifting those into larger rooms so they can practice social distancing. And so it's been give and take. And like I said, it's really been broken down, and we've tried to go through our whole division with a, you know, a fine tooth comb, if you will, to determine where we can and where we can't. Because yeah, the last thing we want to do is be the, you know, the beginnings of a new hotspot, especially given that, you know, we're in West Valley. It's very culturally diverse, and we are, even though the state's moving to a yellow, we are still at an orange level. So the dynamic's a little bit different for us compared to, you know, you up there in Cache Valley. I grew up in the Bear Lake Valley, have a lot of family in Cache Valley. So I certainly understand that. Bear Lake, you know, just one mountain range over from you guys, they haven't had any cases. So it's going to vary depending on your programs, depending on your demographics, and what, you know, your own given situation.
Right. Thanks, Andrew. Paul has asked in the chat who is open, and instead of taking time for us to all verbalize that, I would just ask everybody if you are open and you want to share that you are in the chat, and then there might be an offshoot group that has a conversation around the fact that they're already open. I think we had one other person who had their hand up.
Yeah.
Whoop. You're still muted.
Oh.
Now you're on.
Okay, sorry. So in reference to our conversation, just to follow up on liability, one of the things that we were advised on and had a conversation was really starting with our own internal staff and making sure that our staff felt very comfortable coming back as well. And so I think that's just, we're saying that, you know, everybody has their own risk tolerance, and then also everybody has their own family dynamics on how they engage with either higher risk people. And so that, from a liability standpoint, you know, the risk we've talked about was the risk with interacting with the public or the public interacting with us. But I think it's important to have that conversation internally. So we had it with all our staff, and then we also had it with all the people that would be attending within our building, which is our creatives. And that was the other thing that we made sure that everybody was 100% on board before we interacted with any type of public. And again, we're not open, but as far as the entire venue, but we are, you know, for the art stroll, that was a discussion in 3 weeks where we would be.
Right. Thanks. All right, if we don't have anybody else with their hand up on this subject, that's actually a pretty good transition to talking about what we're all thinking in regards to support and accommodations and requirements for performers, because that's obviously just as important for us to talk about as the audience. And again, for anybody who came in a little bit later, Jim shared with us earlier in the call that he had a conversation with the governor's office, and that in the yellow phase, performers are not required to wear masks or to be, and you should correct me if I get this wrong, Jim, but that they don't have to be more than 6 feet apart on stage. So in terms of what we're thinking for Kingsbury Hall and Utah Presents, for our rental clients and their performers, we're actually asking them to draft and submit to us their plan for what they'll do backstage, because they're all very different. So we might have a big dance school that's going to do a virtual recital with us, and they have hundreds of kids that are going to participate over the course of a whole day. So we've asked them to put together a plan. But for more of the sort of traditional shows that are a touring group, obviously checking temperatures at arrival to the building is something we plan to do, trying to keep as distant as possible from our own tech crew, and keeping distance between them when they're in load in, bringing their own tools, using their own gear, whether it's gloves or masks or whatever it is as they're getting set up, are a couple of things that we're talking about. Normally we have a lot of dressing rooms at our disposal, which is great. And normally we wouldn't necessarily dictate that they spread out, but we can do that. So that works to our advantage. I'm curious what other folks are thinking about doing in regards to performers and backstage.
Seth Miller.
Hand from Seth.
And
Hi, everybody.
Can you introduce your venue when you answer a question, please, everyone?
Sure. So I'm Seth Miller, and I'm with the Grand Theater. We have our first production coming up on July 1st. What I would love to do is just lay out a couple of the precautions that we're thinking of. And if anybody has any suggestions or this is what we're thinking, I would love it if you could email me your thoughts. I'll post my email address in the chat window. I think this is definitely all the heads are better than one. As many people as we can have contributing to this is really gonna help. So some of our initial thoughts were staggering the calls for our cast as they arrive, so that we only have a certain number of people in the dressing room getting ready at a time, and once they're ready, moving out of the theater into a larger area where they can really be social distance. We're fortunate that we have a big open area right off of our backstage, so that people aren't congregating in groups. Our green room and other areas that we've typically used that really aren't that big, we're probably going to close off and say you can use the fridge and things that are in there, but please don't congregate in there. There's just not enough room. We're also thinking that we won't allow anybody to keep any personal items in the dressing rooms overnight, which is going to be kind of a pain, but we want to be able to make sure that we can wipe down all the surfaces, all the counters, all the mirrors every night. And it's just going to be too difficult to do that if people have all their personal items set up at their dressing stations. So in a sense, for us, it's almost like striking the dressing rooms every single night. Everything will be cleared, everything will be wiped, all that kind of stuff. We're desperately trying to get a hold of hand sanitizer so we can have as much of that on hand as we need. We're also fortunate that we have sinks and soap and everything available everywhere backstage, and just encouraging people to wash their hands as much as they can. Whenever you're not on stage, your mask could be required. We also actually haven't ruled out the possibility of having our show performed with the masks. We'll kind of see how all this develops, but those are just some of the initial kind of steps that we're thinking of. If anybody has any other thoughts or ideas, I'm more than then happy to hear them.
Great, thanks, Seth. I know we were also talking internally at Utah Presents because we present touring artists of, you know, changing our contracts. Normally we would provide them with a meal and we won't do that anymore. We'll just give them a buyout and they'll be required to secure their own food and either bring it with them or leave the premises to go get dinner, and not doing our regular green room hospitality for those artists, which is completely antithetical to our nature and our, you know, wish to welcome artists. But again, the risk is just too high. Vicky's heard of a facility replacing faucets and soap to be handless dispensers. That's a great idea, not only in your dressing rooms, but, you know, in your public restrooms as well. And Bridget was asking if anyone has any idea if we have to submit our plans, like our seating maps and how we plan to work with the public and performers, to a health board for approval. And she's referencing the concert that was supposed to happen in Arkansas and then got a cease and desist. Does anybody have any sense of an answer to that question? And I'm looking more at Vicky and Jason and the division staff to see if they've heard anything. Nothing. So this we should put on the list. Maybe if we all call the governor's answer, or call, oh, Vicky, you guys can get an answer for us? That would be great. Instead of all of us calling the governor's office and asking the question, it would be great if you could follow up and let us know. Any other thoughts on accommodating and supporting performers and artists? Thane says he's using social tables to submit a plan to our city and county. What are social tables? Oh, I think staff has to unmute.
Thane.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Sorry. It's a software that is basically of our venue. So we have roughly a 60,000 square foot venue. So we have different elements of the venue, and it's a software that literally you can set up the entire venue with tables, however you want to have it for your client. And then it also has a seating chart if they would like that as well. It's more of a convention services software, but we found it to be a very interesting tool. And one of the things we're doing, we actually have people trying to book events for July, and we're actually saying these are the defined floor plans that we will allow for you to have an event of this that meet the social guidelines and restrictions. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, oh, we want to set up a reception or a wedding or a concert, whatever the way we want it. It's like, no, these are what we'll allow you to do, and then they can sign off on it. So it's a pretty useful tool that we've found. So we will be submitting our plans to our county and our city.
Got it.
Well.
Great. Bridget has asked a question for those of us who present touring artists. Are we planning to still supply transportation to and from the airport? Bridget, we've been making a push over the last couple of years because it's just easier and less of a drain on our staff to rent cars for the artists, but require them to drive it. And because we're a state entity, we can do that. They have to take an online defensive driving course. Which we just ask that they designate, certain members of their company to be the drivers. They take the course, and then we rent the car and pay for it, but they actually drive themselves. So we're going to be pushing harder to have that. And then I think if it's, say, as a group of folks and none of them drive, which happens, I think what I'll do is I'll just negotiate a transportation buyout, and they'll have to figure out how to utilize it, whether, that's taking Lyft and Uber to get to the building or whatever that is, just because that exact concern, like I don't think it's wise for our staff to be sitting in cars and minivans in close quarters, especially before we can do temperature checks and things like that when they arrive to the venue. Any other thoughts about that, about transportation? It looks like Laura at the Moab Music Festival is pushing rentals as well. There was a comment also made about UCA trying to work to do some bulk orders on personal protective equipment, and we should speak up and reach out via Kat Potter if we need help accessing those things.
And Kat just shared a link for information about that.
Great. Another question about, for those of us who offer valet service, I don't offer valet service. Are people thinking that that will be okay once we get to the green phase? Thoughts? Cindy, you might be the only one who offers valet service. I guess I would take my cue from the restaurant industry, and if they're doing it in the green phase, then although maybe you're talking about artist valet and not patrons. I was interpreting that as like people show up at your theater and they can be valet parked. I was like, wow, you guys are fancy. But now I realize you're talking about for artists. So maybe somebody has a different thought about that, hiring a service to pick up artists at the airport or transport them. We haven't done that. So I'm not thinking about it because we probably wouldn't introduce a new thing that we haven't done before, but we're also in Salt Lake. And so mass transit and again, the rental options for us are easier. Other thoughts on that? Jim, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so Sydney's part of our staff here at the Browning Center at Weber State, and it was a valet question about staff. So Andrew is on with Onstage Ogden. When we have the symphony in and sometimes other Weber State events, we offer valet. So it is a concern about, can we get into somebody else's car and touch things? And is there a risk for the person that's bringing their car? But in green, maybe that's less of an issue. And we're not going to hold any events until we get to green right now.
Great, that seems to make sense. All right, if we don't have any other hands raised around those kinds of things, then Wendy, what's next?
All right, we're going to talk operations. And this is one of the things I've been most excited to talk to you about. I thought we might try a little experiment, if you don't mind. I think this works best if you have your video on, but I'm going to throw out some stuff we're doing. And if you're doing it too, maybe do the thumbs up, and then you can kind of scroll back and forth and see if folks are doing stuff. And then if I miss things, you can volunteer them after. And I'm actually going to start with a question from the chat, which is, because Brooke and I kind of talked about this, but are performance venues requiring masks? If you're requiring and not just strongly encouraging, give us a thumbs up. And like I said, we are just gonna encourage. Okay, I am not seeing tons of hands on there. Oh, and thumbs up. Okay, good. And there's the thumbs up thing at the reactions too, if you want to use that. Both are great. What about for those of you who are requiring them? Will you be supplying them or just expecting folks to bring them? And let me ask this two ways. Will you supply them at a small charge? Like, will you charge for them? Masks and charge for them? How about masks for free? Like if you'll have just kind of masks available for people who forget or need them. Okay. We are talking about doing e-programs so that there's not a physical program that you actually get. Okay, good. These might go too fast because those thumbs might disappear. How about no touch tickets? Like, we actually are kind of old fashioned. We take your ticket and help guide you to your seat. We don't have scanners or anything like that. This is a kind of interesting challenge given that the new guidelines say we have to track attendance. So that's going to be interesting to work out, because if we're not actually like kind of registering who's past us, if somebody doesn't show up, we might have a discrepancy there, which will be interesting. We are going to need to shift to a younger usher corps. Training younger ushers. Anybody else doing that? I'm seeing some head nods. Okay. clean sweeps. Now we usually try to hide our cleaning, so we seat people and then we clean really quietly and then we have people come back out. We're gonna do those more visibly. Just selfishly, we're gonna have you see the people cleaning, and maybe even the ushers will be cleaning the handrails up and down as they go. Personal protective equipment, I actually made some. We have some black ones that match, but staff will have matching ones for themselves. And the things like we're having trouble finding this touchless hand sanitizer stations so people don't have to touch it. They're really expensive and look really flimsy. So there's stuff like that at stations of hand sanitizing and places that people can prepare themselves to enter. Split shifts. So maybe you have 2 tech crews running and they don't work with each other, so that if one gets sick, the other one can fill in and they can be quarantined and you're not having to quarantine everybody at once. Early seating for people who are in higher risk categories. Some just won't come anyway. Okay.
I think that's actually required.
Is that required? Okay, so
yeah,
there we go.
You have early access for vulnerable
So you
populations.
better say you're planning to do it then. And then I'm curious to know if anybody's on demand pricing, how that's informed your seating choices. So like for us, and maybe I'll ask this a different way since we're kind of doing the thumbs up thing. How many of you have created a static seat map that allows groups of 2 or groups of 3 or groups of 4, and then people have to buy in those set sections? Because that's what we're doing. That's right. How about people who are doing like Brooke, where it's you say you're going to come and then we're going to seat you? Okay, as however we can in keeping people far apart. For those of you who are doing static seat maps, I have a question. Oh, are you keeping like empty rows between, or are you staggering those? So empty rows, raise your thumbs up if you're empty rows. Thumbs up if you're staggering. And it's tricky for me because like you have to crawl over fewer people if you stagger rows. So like 1 row here, then I think I have to put 3 rows between people. So over here, that wasn't very clear, sorry. In any case, we're trying to kind of stagger those groups. We actually did a really weird thing when we hoped we could do we were doing a thought experiment. Could we do this dance recital? And we had four ground plans. 1, let's see here, 1 there, 1 here, and 1 here. So that if we went to green, we could actually seat the whole house. And we thought that it was so clever, but it, for other reasons, we didn't end up doing it. So, and then you can have people come in, watch their kid. You don't have time to use the restroom. There's going to be no intermission. You just go out the emergency exits. We clean behind you and the next group comes in. We were really proud of it. Sad we didn't get to use it. Other things people are doing, or if you're using demand pricing, is that helping with these decisions? This is a really interesting way we're having to change. And I recognize too that a lot of these things will increase our costs right when our capacity is lower. And like we were talking about with the Utah Cultural Celebration Center, you're moving smaller groups to bigger rooms, and that means you're not generating the revenue that you were making off those larger rooms. So at some point you just say this just isn't feasible and we just can't do it till we're in green. Any other things people are doing that they're finding useful? One-way entrances and exits, so you go in one way and out another. Anybody putting like dividers in their ticket office so that there's a barrier between? Seeing a lot of those kinds of things. Okay.
I'll share. My internet is not cooperating very much, so hopefully you can hear me. But the Parker Theater, which I think used to Utah Children's Theater, so if it doesn't sound familiar, they had a name change. They actually just did a great video, and it's pretty simple because it's geared towards young audiences, but I just saw that today, great video of their executive director, you know, this is how we're going to enter the theater, and this is how super short, but also super point. So that's a great thing to look at if you're thinking about how you might communicate with your audiences.
I love that. And I think some folks on the autism spectrum actually do better when they have an idea of what they're coming into. So some of those might be ideas we carry over in the future as well. I really liked seeing, I watched the same one and saying, oh, this is exactly how they're doing it. So good, 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 good. Let's see, we have a historic theater, so it's a little bit tricky for us in terms of crowd control, but honestly, logistically, I don't actually know how we can do a performance in our hall until we're in green, even though we're doing all of this work to try to set it up. Just the economics of opening up to 10 to 20% of our house, just the numbers aren't working for us. And the experience, I mean, we are looking at blended, so maybe we have a show and we broadcast it, but then you have to decide who that's for. Like, is it for the people sitting in the seats, or is it for the audience that's watching it? And if it's for the audience that's watching it, then you're entering a very crowded field where we're all sick of watching screens, and there's so much really, really good free professional stuff out there that it's hard to compete. And if our core value proposition is providing live experiences, then the only reason someone would connect with us online is if they have a connection with us and a loyalty to us, not because the content that we're delivering is somehow unique or something they can't get in some other way. So we're having to make some real choices about what do we look like and what do we mean in this kind of experience. But it might provide a backup for somebody who, if things shift and they can't come, but they hope that they could. Certainly, I think most of us are probably lightening our refund and a reschedule policies so that people don't feel like they have to come if they're sick. They can get their money back or get a gift certificate. And of course, we're encouraging people to donate it if they can, but all of our former rules are out the window because we want you to feel like you can be home if you're not feeling well.
I'm curious what others are doing in regards to if you're making refunds, are you also refunding your facility and ticketing fees?
I'm seeing some nods. We did, but now I'm thinking I shouldn't. I heard a great argument, and maybe Brooke, it might have been a call you and I were both on where someone said, we've got to pay somebody to issue this refund to you. And these are funds that support our ticket office. And so we will give you back a balance of the funds, but just recognize someone's done a lot of work both to sell you the ticket and then to refund the ticket. And there's credit card fees that we have to pay. So we're actually out of pocket. And we just sent it all back. And
yeah, that actually has been our policy. And that's what we did with our canceled events from the spring. And now as we're having some of our renters cancel for fall things, you know, we're maintaining that policy. Bridget is wondering in the chat if anyone has looked at timed entry for ticket holders and figuring out the logistics of that. I know we've talked about it, Bridget, but we haven't figured it out. I mean, essentially you'd have to communicate with your audience prior as to what their time is. We have decided not to send people tickets though, even if they like to get their tickets in the mail. We're just telling everyone, you need to use mobile ticketing because mailing you tickets it doesn't make any sense right now.
And wouldn't it be better to seat our high-risk folks last, not first, so that they have less exposure to everybody else?
Yeah, so that came up in the chat, Wendy. You were talking, so you probably didn't get a chance to see it. But
I'm not as good at monitoring both as you
are. Bridget said that she was thinking that she would go to doing, you know, vulnerable at-risk folks right at the end, which makes way more sense. And then we also had a quick double check of the guidelines, and it just says they have to have an established time. It does not have to be early. So yeah, that seems real smart. All right, I want to be mindful of the time because we're almost done. And there was one more topic area we want to talk about, which were rentals. And a question had been posed before we all came together. How folks are handling rentals. Are you the venue making the decision on the cancellation, or are you leaving it up to the renter? And then for the cost of the cancellation, are you sharing that with those users? How are you approaching those things? So I'll just say quickly that for Kingsbury Hall, you know, we've made the decision for a lot of people based on our governor's decisions. And now we're in the orange phase. Like I said, some of our renters, we've said, well, you can try to do a virtual event. So if you want to move ahead that way, let us know, and we'll work with you on that. And for our future renters, we're saying, we don't know yet. And trying to work with them to make the decision. Now, we also have renters who have decided on their own to cancel. We're refunding their deposits because they're not able to deliver their events. For the renters who have ticket refunds to make, we've maintained the policy that we'll keep the fees because we have to cover the cost of having run the ticket office for them. And then we do have one regular renter who passes the credit card charges on to the patrons. They don't take care of it themselves. And so they don't want the patron to have to pay that in a refund situation. So we're telling them that then they have to pay it to us because we shouldn't have to pay it. But we are refunding deposits and not expecting people to pay for the usage fee if they couldn't do their event. How about other folks? Anybody with their hand up? Seth said our renters backed out once they understood the guidelines and restrictions. It's just not cost effective for them. Sure, yeah, you have plenty of people who can do their own math. We're also, for some of our renters that do want to move forward, but understand that they're either going to be with limited audience or they're doing it in a virtual capacity, we're willing to negotiate our rental fee. Some money is better than no money is my thought process there.
Here's an idea. Someone lowered their deposits, thing. And then gyms canceling events for the renters. They're offering full refunds, but encouraging them to rebook for a different date.
How far out are you rebooking, Jim?
Just gonna ask.
Do you have a crystal ball or does your magic 8-ball?
Oh, rebooking. Sorry, not refunding, rebooking. Okay.
Oh,
good,
yeah,
good,
but
good.
even in the rebooking, every time I check my 8-ball, it says, check back again later, try again later.
That's
We have a couple more that I want to make sure that are coming in on the chat. So Linda Hale, Hale Center Theater Orem, we're considering having patrons remain in their cars and use restaurant tables ready paging system to text them when they can enter the theater to seat. Entrada will video and or broadcast performers and presenters with limited audience. And Jim, Craig says they're canceling events for the, oh, you read that one.
Yeah.
And
so does anybody, Laurel, does anybody have their hand up?
No hands up right now.
Okay. In terms of the festivals, I think Kat said in the beginning that the adjusted guidelines that came out yesterday, the most recent guidelines that both in yellow and orange, festivals are still not allowed, that I believe they fall under the temporary gathering, and those are still prohibited. And Jim is rebooking for August, but understanding that they'll probably need to move those as well. And that's similar to what we're doing. It's all a moving target.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious where everybody's like next, either like when you're taking bookings for. So we've got August. My next scheduled thing is September. That doesn't mean if somebody came to me with a plan that we could do, I wouldn't go earlier, but that's the next thing on my books.
All right. Any other thoughts about?
Kat has commented or has just reminded us that the both orange and yellow phase, and this deals with the festivals, no temporary mass gatherings as defined in Rule 392-400.
Right, right.
Our gardeners market opens. They use sort of a grocery store model, so no crafts, which is unfortunate for all our artisans. Food only, a one-way path through, and you have to have a distance between each party, but they were at least able to have something like a festival because they were tying into the grocery essential piece.
Sure. Okay, so it looks like we have just a few minutes left. Are there other issues anybody wants to talk about? Other questions that maybe didn't fall into these sort of buckets of information that we were addressing? Sean Taylor asked if we could do a drive-in festival.
I'm game. No, this is an interesting point though. A lot of the things we've talked about will be easier to do in warmer weather. If we have our doors open longer, if we have people stay in their cars, they're going to be idling. There's things that are like, we have an anti-idling ordinance in Cache County. So if I make people stay outside in Logan, Utah, and then they have to schlep a half a mile to get to the theater from wherever they were able to find parking, because I have no dedicated parking for my 1,100 seat theater, we're going to have an impact on the environment, and the theater's going to get cold with all those doors opening.
Yeah. Let's see. Sean Taylor said SLC Health Department said yes, that, and I assume you're answering that drive-ins are okay. But that outdoor concerts would fall into a festival-like event. Kat, is that what you mean? Maybe we can unmute Kat so she can.
Does that work?
You're on, Kat.
Yeah, I don't know all of the specifics of rule, was it R392400 in general, that covers a lot of festivals and sort of the timeline of more than 2 hours and sometimes encompassing multiple days. So I would say if you have an event that is like a festival, read through the guidelines of that rule, and if it seems like it could fall outside of those guidelines, then definitely ask about it, because it's about creativity, and if you can find a way to make it work, then by all means, just make sure that you run it by someone either at the governor's office or at your state or your local health department, just to make sure it's all okay.
Yeah.
And that
Jeff,
rule would be found where? Is that administrative rules, like state administrative rules, or anybody know where we can find the actual language? Laura.
Let's see. Laura Brown has her hand raised, her actual hand raised. If we could unmute her.
So actually, that kind of scared me when I read it, because we are a festival, but we're I'm with the Moab Music Festival, but we're more of we do concerts. But I did look at, if you type that into Google, it pops up, but it's basically defined as an assembly of 1,000 or more people, which continues or can be reasonably expected to continue for 2 or more hours per day at, so there's a very pretty good definition of that. But I wanted to ask a question, because we're trying to figure out how we can actually hold our festival. It's primarily outdoors, but then thinking about just listening to everybody and thinking about this whole seating thing, because we've been talking about how do we keep, if we have a couple of bigger venues where people could sit on the lawn, but if I guess they're not controlled in an assigned seat, maybe that's not right.
I understand orange. I'm not sure if it applies to yellow as well, and maybe Kat, you can answer this, but that
the ability to track attendance and
assigned seats are important.
I think that it's more about contact tracing and being able to track who was at a specific event, more so than knowing exactly where they were located at the event. However, I would have to go back and check, so I will check on that.
Okay. But in orange, it's definitely, and if they don't have assigned seats, that's not an orange thing, right?
In both orange and yellow, they say that you have to have the ability to track attendance, but it doesn't say track attendance by seat. There's obviously the social distancing requirements within a reserved seating facility, but I believe in terms of knowing who is where, it's more about who was at your event at that particular date and time than it is about exactly where they were sitting.
Okay, thank you.
It does say for reserved seating facilities, then the capacity is dependent on the ability to block reserved seats, demonstrated on a digital seat map. So that might be do you have to report this to anybody question to ensure safe radius. The challenge that I think you're going to find, Laura, like we found with this dance group, is getting people to comply. Like you can say you have to have this much space apart, but then how do you enforce that with the general public?
Well, you could have, you know, the seats just taped off, and it's about usher staff enforcement, right? So it's more ushers with more eyes on people saying, oh, nope, you guys are too close together.
That's kind of what we're talking about now, is just seeing if we can have more people just be able to ensure that people are properly distanced, or whether we do some kind of tape off.
Yeah.
I don't know, but we're thinking, so.
Yeah, Paul shared that he's taping off rows and seats. We were planning on doing the same. Sean just shared that they're doing drive-through graduations for some schools, and SLC Health Department said it was okay, as long as people stay in their cars, they didn't consider that a mass gathering. That's useful. Great, thanks everybody. So we're pretty much at the end of our time, and I just want to again thank all of you for coming together. I have a whole page of notes here of interesting and smart things I heard from all of you, and it's super, super helpful. I also want to ask if you all want us to convene this again, a group that's specific to, you know, facilities and performing arts facilities, and how we're navigating as some of us open and some of us just continue to worry about opening. Or if, you know, oh, I see a yes, this was helpful from Jim and Don. So we could also break into smaller groups, but I think if doing it this way, it allows people to hear from, you know, the bigger brain trust, which is great. So, so hopefully the division and their smart people can help us host this again. I think it was really, really great to have your support. And we can—
Brooke, if I can add one thing, I just wanted to say I added one other link to the chat. This is on the business page of the coronavirus site, but if halfway down that page, it's a page about workplace resources, there's a PPE section. So in addition to the Utah Cultural Alliance bulk order, there is actually a spreadsheet, a link to a spreadsheet of PPE vendors, and it can tell you a whole number of organizations that offer masks, hand sanitizer, gloves, anything. If you're having trouble sourcing, I would say check that out and see if any of those are helpful to you.
I also think as we find ways to be consistent across each other will help train our audiences better. So just hearing what the rest of you are planning has been hugely helpful to me, and thank you for that. Thank you for one more Zoom meeting.
This was great. Thank you all so much for coming. And Wendy, Brooke, thank you so much for facilitating this conversation, diving into these subjects. I do think it's worth, in a little bit of time, coming back and having this kind of meeting again, because I think at that point, some people will be open, some people won't. So I think we could hear a lot of good stories from the field, which I think will be really helpful for all of us. Laurel, do you want to just take a second and talk about CARES?
CARES, sure. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all that you are doing. Just a reminder that the CARES application is open for the National Endowment for the Arts that we are administering. It's due a week from today at 5 p.m. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm trying to stay on top of any questions, and bug me if I miss somehow. I'm buried like the rest of you. Then if you have humanities programming, we also encourage you to, specific to that humanities programming, take advantage of the fact that Utah Humanities has opened their CARES through the National Endowment for the Humanities more open than ours is. We have a floor. If you don't have a budget of at least $100,000, you're not to apply in this particular round with us, but Utah Humanities is running a more open program, and there's also closes around the same time frame. There's also closes on the 12th. So I'm very much available to you and want to help. We're super anxious to help, and we are here to support. And I think it'll be good to get this group together again. And we may. I've had some private chats. We may do some structure a little differently. to hear some specific stories if we gather people together again. So we'll retool this and keep working on the details.
Vicky did put into the chat our page for COVID funding resources, but this page also has many resources. So also saving this chat. Wendy, you had mentioned that people can save this chat. We are recording this, so we can also make sure that you all have access to this again. But Tracy, would you mention the saving the chat?
Yeah, I will save the chat and pull out some of the most important resources that have been shared and create a notes page also with just some other things we've heard today. We'll include the recording and the chat. If you would like to save the chat yourself, if you open up your chat and look in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a little ... button, and if you click that, you can save the chat yourself, and then you can pull out. If you have been chatting with anyone privately, you will save those messages. When I pull the chat, I won't see your private messages. Might be good, who knows. Maybe give me about a day to get the recording up on our website, but I will email everyone that registered for the call the notes, the recording, those sorts of things. I had one more resource I wanted to share, which is the state of Utah is providing a free mask if you need one. The suggestion is if you can't buy one, if you can't make one yourself, you can request a free mask, and I'm sharing the link for that mask order form on your site. Some of you work with particular audiences that it might be worth sharing this resource with them. But I will echo all my colleagues. This was really lovely to hear what everyone is thinking. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was great to see everyone's faces. We think about you all the time. We're wishing the very best for all of you. Please reach out to us as a resource. We're happy to talk through anything. Yeah, stay strong, keep doing the good work, fight the fight.
Let me just jump in with one last thing that I totally forgot. Utah Presenters Network, if you do touring shows and you had to cancel or reschedule something, it's just $500, but it's $500. So we'll have that come out in the notes with Tracy's follow-up. We'll get her the link to that. And Bridget just put it in the chat. So apply and we'll get a little bit out to you.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care, have a good weekend.
Thanks all, bye-bye. Thanks everyone. And for those of you again that don't live in Zoom, if you look in your bottom right-hand corner, there is a leave button when you're ready to leave. I still struggle to find it, so there you go.
Thank you.